Gospel lesson this morning is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 2 through 11. I invite you, as you're able, let us honor the reading of the Gospel as we stand together. When John the Baptist heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. It's always appropriate. Last week we talked about gifts, the kind of gifts that we get. And for this morning, what I would like for you to do, I invite you to answer this question. If you'll turn to a neighbor or two or three people around you, and I want you to think about what is the one gift that was the gift to have when you were growing up? What was the hot gift item that everybody wanted to get on Christmas when you were growing up, when you were a kid or a teenager? All right? So you've got 90 seconds and go. All right, let's come back together. Time's up. Let's hear some of the responses to that. What was the hot toy or hot item to have as a kid when you were growing up for Christmas? Jerry. A Fort Apache. What was that again? Miniature. Okay, Cowboys and Soldier. Okay. That was a little before my time, yes. Yeah. An Atari, 2600, yes. The banana seat bicycle, okay. Roller skates. Record player, yes. The actual vinyl, yes. Yep. I do know what records are, yes. What else? Members only jackets. Oh my goodness, that brings back memories. A lot of Gen Xers here, I think. Gen X responses to that. What else? Cabbage Patch Dolls. There were riots in Walmart, if you remember, over Cabbage Patch Dolls, if you can believe that. Every year we get gifts that we want. Sometimes, though, we don't get all the gifts that we want. Or sometimes we get gifts that at first glance seem to disappoint us. We didn't want those gifts. We're going to talk about those kinds of gifts this morning. We're finishing up our sermon series called The Gospel According to Elf, based on the popular Christmas holiday movie starring Will Ferrell. We've learned how Buddy the elf is driven by, or he lives by, the code of the elves. 3 rules that Santa's elves live by. And the first one we learned about was treat every day like Christmas. Last week we found out that there's room for everyone on the nice list. And today we're going to talk about the 3rd rule, which is the best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear. Now, at the end of the movie Elf, or near the end, the rocket engine that powers Santa's sleigh is damaged. And Santa and all the reindeer and all the presents are plummeting. They're about to crash. The only other thing that powers Santa's sleigh is the Christmas spirit in people's lives. As it plummets towards the ground, we see that the needle on the Christmas spirit dial is dangerously low. Well, on the ground below, there's a group of people who are watching this, and they're watching what is happening, and a young woman named Jovi, with whom Buddy the elf is in love with, she remembers this 3rd rule about spreading Christmas cheer by singing loud for all to hear, and so she begins to sing. And as she sings, she invites others to join her in this song. And they all start joining their voices together. The last one to start singing is Buddy's father, Walter Hobbs, who reluctantly and then joyfully joins with the crowd of voices. And then the singing of the other people generates enough Christmas spirit to power and to save Santa's sleigh. God's people are called to be a singing people. Singing is foundational to our faith. In the Bible, there are over 400 references to singing, and in fact, there are 50 direct commands to sing. The Psalms repeatedly tell us to sing to the Lord a new song, or sing praises to the Lord. And our singing is in response to what God has done for us. Singing helps us to express our gladness, to express our joy that we have because of God's blessings and God's grace in our lives. Singing also helps us to express our sadness or disappointment or even our lament. In fact, someone has counted that almost 1/3 of the Psalms are psalms of lament, or psalms of disappointment, or psalms of anger even. Almost 1/3 of the Psalms are about lament. So the Psalms really do cover the whole range of human emotion. We Methodists have historically been known for our singing. This is one of the ways in which we learn about our faith. Charles Wesley, the brother of John Wesley, our founder, Charles Wesley, wrote hymn lyrics that taught good theology, that taught good biblical theology. And his brother, John, wrote a list of rules of singing that he expected all good Methodists to follow. And you can find these rules for singing in the front of our United Methodist hymnal. One of the rules is this: sing lustily and with good courage. Beware of singing as if you were half dead or half asleep. Still relevant today, is it not? But lift up your voice with strength. Singing helps us to remember things. It helps us to remember words. It helps us to remember concepts and ideas. And especially when those words and ideas and concepts are about the mighty acts of God in our lives. Singing helps us to remember what God has done for us. Singing connects us to our memories. This is why in December, most congregations, they sing out a little more confidently, a little more louder, because you know these Christmas songs so well. They're so familiar with us, and they helped us connect to our memories. These songs, these feelings are deeply embedded in us. They help us to remember the things that God has done for us in the past, that God is doing for us now in the present, and they help us to remember the promises of God for us in the future. A friend of mine is a pastor, used to be serving this conference. He's now in Kentucky. John Varden was telling me about an experience that he and some friends had when they were in Indonesia. And they decided to go hiking one day on an inactive volcano. They got a native Indonesian, a couple of native Indonesian guides to help them in this trek. And he said that at some point in the hike, the inactive volcano became very, very active. He said the first explosion was like a bomb going off. And then they started getting hit and pelted with debris. One of the Indonesian guides was struck in the head by a rock and instantly killed. John got hit with a rock in his leg and it broke his leg. He and his friends, they took refuge behind a huge boulder. And at some point, they made a splint for his leg, and eventually they decided they had to get off the mountain. They had to slowly make their way down the mountain, not knowing if there was going to be another explosion, not knowing if they were going to get hit with more rocks and debris, not knowing if they were even going to make it down the mountain. And John said the thing that kept them alive, the thing that kept them hopeful and motivated, was that they all sang hymns as they walked down the mountain. They sang the hymns that they learned in childhood, words and hymns that had been embedded in their memory. They remembered the words that declared the glory of God and the majesty of God and the goodness of God in the midst of great fear and terror. It was singing that kept them alive. It was singing that got them down the mountain. What do you do when your plans don't turn out the way you thought they would? What do you do when life doesn't turn out the way you thought it would? When your 5-year plan has to be scrapped and you have to start over? What do you do when the dreams and the plans that you had envisioned for yourself turn out to be, well, a bit of a disappointment? John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus, could tell you about disappointment. He had been preaching fire and brimstone at the Jordan River, telling people to get ready because God was going to send someone. God was going to send Messiah, the one they've been waiting on. Messiah was coming and was bringing fire and an axe with him. Like Jesus, John's favorite prophet in the Old Testament was Isaiah. And last week we talked about how Isaiah had envisioned a new world to come when Messiah came. The world in which rivers flowed in the desert, where wolves and lambs play together, where cows feel comfortable in the presence of lions, where children played over the den of snakes safely. And John was given a revelation that the title of Messiah seemed to have been placed upon his cousin Jesus. It seems that Jesus would be the one who would make Israel great again, who would overthrow the Romans, cure all sickness and disease, and restore creation to its proper intention. When John baptized Jesus, we might assume that he was expecting great things to come immediately. The world was going to change very soon. But we know that in the days and weeks and months after Jesus' baptism, the desert did not bloom. It was still as dry as ever. Rome was still in charge and enforced its will with brutality. And wolves still looked at lambs not as friends, but as lunch. And today, in Matthew's gospel, we find John in prison. He's been arrested for preaching against King Herod's adulterous marriage. John has gone from the wide open space of the wilderness to the close confines of a prison cell. His voice has been silenced, his sermons no longer heard. Imagine his disappointment in the way things have turned out. Word has somehow gotten back to John about what Jesus has been doing. And to put it bluntly, John is not impressed. John is a bit disappointed. His cousin did not seem to be fulfilling John's Christmas wish list, a list that included fiery punishment for the wicked and the unrepentant being cut down with an axe. And so, from prison, John sends a message to Jesus in the form of a question. Are you the one that we've been waiting for, or should we be waiting for someone else? Not exactly a ringing endorsement. In other words, John is saying that he's been hearing things about Jesus' ministry, what Jesus has been doing, and frankly, it's a little disappointing. In light of what the Hebrew prophets had been envisioning, Jesus did not seem to be delivering the goods. Before Jesus began his ministry, John spoke with unwavering confidence about the one who was to come. But now, in the middle of Jesus' ministry, John seems to be having some doubts. He's not quite as certain. Which brings to mind a question to ponder. What do you do when it appears that God is not delivering the goods? What do you do when God does not give you all the items on your wish list? John's question gives voice to the disappointment that we all experience in life. Jesus sends word back to John. He tells John's two disciples, "Go and tell John that the blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them." Jesus tells these two disciples to go and tell John just simply what they have seen. These little sneak previews, these little glimpses of the things that are to come. Notice the message is not, okay, all of the blind now see, all of the deaf now hear, all of the dead are now raised. No, Jesus has been doing these small things as sneak previews of the kingdom. In light of today's theme, the best way to spread the gospel of Jesus is to join our voices in the song of good news, simply by telling what we've seen. Advent calls us to sing the promises of God, even when those promises seem far off, beyond our grasp. We long for that day when swords will be beaten into plowshares, when cancer wards will be empty, when funeral homes will go out of business, when there'll be no more need for soup kitchens or relief agencies. We long for that day when the earth will be filled with the peace of God. Hunger and sickness and death will be no more. But until that day comes, we will take the small gifts, the sneak previews, the glimpses. We will take the gifts we didn't ask for. We will even take the gifts we didn't want as signs of hope. When I was growing up as a kid, Christmas morning meant waking up at 5:08 and just lying in bed, consumed by the anticipation of all the gifts that were just down the hallway in our living room. And when my brother and I could no longer contain our excitement, we would get up and go and see what was left under the Christmas tree. And without fail, every year, we got everything that we wanted. Later, we would then drive to my grandparents' house for a big lunch with all of my aunts and uncles and my cousins, and we would either show or tell about all the gifts that we got. And sometime after lunch, every Christmas, my grandmother would gather the grandchildren around her Christmas tree, and she would hand out her gifts to us. And year after year, without fail, it was the same gift: socks and underwear. Now, as a kid, I had no concept, I had no idea what a fixed income was. My grandparents were simple farmers who had more land than money. But I was taught to say thank you to anyone who ever gave me a gift. And so I would say thank you, and my face would light up, but in my head I was thinking, socks and underwear again? Is that all? I mean, compared to the go-kart that I got one Christmas, or compared to the electric race car set that I got one year, or compared to the Atari 2600 gaming console, socks and underwear just seemed to be not cool. So disappointing. It would be much later in life when I'd be sitting down getting dressed for something, and I'd be putting on a pair of socks, and I noticed that there'd be a hole in my socks. And I would think to myself, man, I wish my grandmother were around to give me a pair of socks right now. Jesus was supposed to be the fire and brimstone Messiah, the axe-swinging Messiah, the burn the dead branches Messiah. But instead, he turned out to be the socks and underwear kind of Messiah. Not at all what we were expecting. Really not what we wanted at first. So disappointing at first glance. But later, we would begin to see that by the grace of God, this gift, this Jesus, turned out to be the gift we needed. The gift we didn't ask for, maybe even the gift we didn't wanted, turns out to be exactly what we needed. Thanks be to God. Amen.